Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. This is part 2 of our 3-part series on creativity, flow, and the evolving self. With me is Professor Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi of the Department of Psychology at the University of Chicago, where he is the former chairman. He's the author of numerous books, including the bestseller Flow, which we'll be talking about during this half hour, and also the evolving self and creativity. Welcome, Mihaly.
Thank you.
It's good to be back with you again. Flow is a fascinating concept, and many, many people have resonated to that book and to your writing because I think it deals with something everyone's interested in: human happiness, passion, pleasure, what makes life itself worth living. And you've sort of encapsulated all of that in the notion of flow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was lucky to stumble on that on this concept, which all of us know about its existence. We all have experienced it one time or the other, but psychology was not very quick on picking up on that, being preoccupied mostly with pathology, with what's wrong with the human condition. But I had seen enough problems during World War II as a child. I'd seen the disintegration of cultures and people living unhappy lives and doing more harm to each other than good. And I was trying to understand whether there was more to life than that. You know, whether is this all there is? You know, war and poverty and inhumanity. And I knew that there must be something different because I had experienced it, but there was no good way to talk about it. There was no terminology, there was no theory to explain what is that part of life which is worth living. And I was searching for that, and it was as a graduate student when I started studying artists that I began to notice the similarity in their behavior when they became lost in the process of creating a work of art, and they were so concentrated and focused and so involved and would not put down their brush for anything. It was just too important for them to continue. And I tried to understand, okay, well, this is a great, it seems that these people are really living to the fullest of their potential during these periods. Now, is there any other way of experiencing this type of feeling? And at that point I decided to study other individuals who are not creative in the sense of being artists and so forth, but who seem to spend long periods of time doing things for which they get no usual rewards like money or fame or recognition. And so I started looking at rock climbers, interviewing rock climbers, interviewing chess players, dancers, composers of music, athletes of different kind, who seem to derive a great deal of satisfaction from what they were doing and not from the results of what they were doing. They weren't getting great rewards except the activity itself. And it was this common, what was so surprising is that people in these greatly different activities, chess and rock climbing and art and music, they describe how they feel when they are really involved in what they're doing and enjoying it. They describe it in very similar ways. And this gave me the idea that, well, all of us have the potential to experience these. Some of us will experience it through sports, some through art, some through some other activity like chess or working with computers, but it is what in a sense we are programmed to do as human beings, is to experience this full involvement with life.
Now, a great psychologist who influenced me in my early years was Abraham Maslow, who, like you, studied people of this sort, and he developed a notion, I think a little different. He talked about peak experiences that all of these people reported, but I gather that this is not the same as the flow state.
Well, I think that probably what Maslow was talking about, and by the way, he influenced me too. I was also a grad student when he started writing. This peak experience seems to be the most developed form of flow. I don't. I think though that one problem I had with the peak experience notion was that it seemed to come as a kind of epiphany out of the blue to people who are kind of prepared for it and
almost mystical.
Yeah, right. Whereas what I saw these people doing, whom I was studying, is to develop slowly the ability to produce this experience through involvement with a particular activity. So it wasn't something mysterious or kind of chancy, but it was the result of one's own doing.
And you described flow in a way that struck me as paradoxical in this sense, that people who experience flow in their lives are often the happiest people. They're passionate and involved in their work, but happiness is not what they're even thinking about when they're engaged.
Exactly. No, suppose that you are a rock climber, and as you're climbing this very difficult rock, you start thinking how happy you are. You know, I mean, probably you will fall down, or you are singing a song or playing an instrument, and as you're playing, you say, "Oh, isn't this great?" You know, you would be missing the music. So you can't. When you're really involved, you don't have time to be happy. You cannot afford to be happy. It's afterwards when you look back and you say, "What was that about?" You know, I never felt so good. I never felt so part of life. You know, I was never so completely myself. And then you say, "Aha, that must be happiness." I mean, that's what I want.
It sounds like what you're saying is that being happy is very different from thinking about being happy.
Right. Those are two different moments of the process. Yeah.
And the people who are skilled at experiencing flow throughout their lives, you describe this, I think, as a skill that can be learned, and that is, it's not about seeking the thrill of the flow state. It's more about living your whole life holistically.
Well, yeah, there are people who do it by developing one or two skills at which they can. For instance, I don't know if you are an athlete or a you like to bicycle, so every weekend you go out, and as you tour the countryside, you feel this flow experience, and you go back refreshed. And
I've run a few marathons, actually.
Okay,
so
marathon is one. So you can do it this way, of having certain activities that will produce flow, and they become kind of the benchmarks of your life, and you look back on them, and they give the rest of your life a feeling of replenishment. You are recreating yourself when you do those things. But the other possibility is to transform the kind of everyday routines of life, from brushing your teeth to cooking to washing dishes, into little works of art which have their own goals and their own rules, and then you don't need these peaks of these great moments of flow, but you can experience it throughout.
It sort of reminds me of the poetry of Walt Whitman, who seemed to find ecstasy in the most, scratching his armpits.
Or the Zen monasteries where you sweep the floor, and you are supposed to do that with a kind of a mastery, and that will give you a feeling of perfection in a sense. And
so what you're saying is that in any walk of life, in any area of human endeavor, it is possible to enter into this state. In fact, you even suggest that Adolf Eichmann, working in the Nazi extermination camps, might have experienced a sense of flow.
Well, I don't remember saying that, but it's possible in these kind of bureaucrats to enjoy the kind of organizing and setting things up, and yeah, but that's a good point, because I'm not saying that flow is necessarily a good thing.
It's not an end in itself.
No,
ultimately, there needs to be more.
Right. I like to use the analogy of energy. Energy we can use for good and bad purposes. I mean, fire you can use to burn a house or cook a meal. Electricity you can shock somebody to death, or light your house and whatever. And the same with flow. I mean, flow is energy. I mean, it's a way of focusing and a way to motivating people to do things. But if there are no opportunities for experiencing flow in positive activities, constructive activities, pro-social activities, then people will find flow in things which are destructive. And a lot of juvenile delinquency, gang warfare is a natural seeking of some flow when the other avenues are blocked.
Yeah. Well, you, as I recall, the example of Eichmann from your book was in the context of making the distinction between people who choose an activity because of some inner guided inspiration on the one hand to find flow, and other people who are they take whatever is given to them socially and as appropriate, like Eichmann, who was in a bureaucracy. The people can enter into that flow state just by doing what they're told.
Yeah, ritual has the potential of making you experience flow, and a lot of religious ritual or bureaucratic ritual has that kind of comfortable pattern to it that could suck people into it and blind them to the consequences of their actions. Yeah.
I mean, in a sense, it's almost as if the flow state could be likened to a trance, say people experience when they watch a movie.
Yeah. It's possible to get flow also from reading books, and in fact reading books is one of the most frequently mentioned leisure activities that produces flow, because when you read a good novel you kind of lose yourself, you identify with the characters and with the epoch and setting and so forth. So that a good movie, a good theater, so you can do it. But see, one of the essential things about flow is that it comes when a person's skills are well matched to the opportunities for action or challenges in the environment. So the question about you can't have flow in an activity where you're not using skills or there is no challenge. And many people, for instance, never get involved with a book because they have the inability to use the skill that's needed to read a good book, which is to empathize with characters, to imagine, to play in your mind the scenery, to see the people moving and the houses and whatever else there is in the book. And if you don't have that skill, it becomes very tedious, and it's just words on a page, and you don't get involved, you don't get lost. So.
It sounds like, one of the points that you make is that to really optimize the experience of flow, you want to take activities where you have the skills, but where you're also challenged, but where you can succeed.
Right. I think one of the problems is that people often don't realize the skills they have, or they think that, okay, this is not for me, I can do it. One of the readers of my book was a man of 84 who said that he had, after reading the book, he realized that he had flow when he was 24 years old, and he was in the army, and he was playing polo on horseback because they were using horses to drag the guns, the artillery, field artillery, and when they stopped, they would use the horse to play polo. And he thought that this great feeling of exhilaration he felt was due to playing polo, and that's the only way you could get it. So for 60 years he lived a life after that devoid of this feeling, because he always thought, well, I can't play polo, so I can't have this feeling. And after reading the book, he started gardening, he started cooking, he did a lot of new things, and said, my gosh, I feel just as good as I was at 24. But 60 years in between with none of this feeling.
I guess maybe a great deal of what we call the midlife crisis is people realizing that they're losing some of the old things they used to do where they entered into that state.
Yeah, that's very important, because as you develop, as you grow, you mature, hopefully, there are new opportunities opening up and old ones closing up. Like, for instance, many men try to prolong their athletic, the flow they got when they were in college or 20, and so they keep trying to use their body as the only way to get flow from, and that's a losing proposition. I mean, sooner or later, you can still run marathons when you're 80, but that can't be the sole source of flow anymore. You have to begin to look at other options and other possibilities. Same thing with people whose flow comes from work. Many people have their strongest flow experiences on their jobs, from what they do, their profession, their vocation, and once they have to retire, they lose that challenge, and there's no more opportunity to get that. And then many of them wilt and kind of collapse internally.
Well, in virtually every instance, I think you point out that there's a force that works against flow. You call it entropy, and it's a physical principle that operates throughout the whole universe. Things tend to run down.
They tend to run down, and it's hard to get at a higher energy state when you're in a lower state. So you come home tired from work or from school, and what do? I mean, you need a jolt of energy to get to start to play an instrument, or to change and go out on your bike, or to do something that will produce flow. So most people, instead of putting out that initial energy that will get them this feeling of enjoyment, they rather go with the entropy. They let the tiredness take over, and then what do? They have a drink, another drink, and maybe watch too much television, which in large doses is not a good way of using one's life, or they read trashy books and so forth, because that's all very easy. I mean, it doesn't require skill, doesn't require challenge, it doesn't produce challenge. So I think that is a problem, that flow is a high energy. It gives you a lot of energy, but it requires a certain initial input before you can really go.
One of the points that you make is, in order to avoid some of these degenerating and entropic kinds of activities, wasteful activities, we have to be comfortable being with ourselves in solitude.
Yes. And that's one of the most important, interesting things. One of the books I wrote, Talented Teenagers, with two of my students, is a study of 200 young high school students as they moved through high school. All of these kids initially were seen as having very high talent in math or music or art or science. And as you see them year after year as they move to high school, one of the greatest obstacles that they encountered was the ability to be alone so that they could practice their instrument or read their books, etc. Those talented kids who didn't have the ability to be alone, to tolerate solitude, they eventually dropped out. I mean, not dropped out of high school, but from their talent. I mean, they became average instead of developing their potential. And that is true of adults too. We try to fill our day with activity, with interactions, even if they don't mean much, but because we are afraid of being alone, and that's in the long run doesn't. It contributes more to entropy than to flow.
You recommend a number of disciplines, from meditation to yoga or to the martial arts, for people to become comfortable with themselves in solitude.
Right. That or mastering some form of symbolic skill, like whether it's art or poetry or music, are also, if you are comfortable with processing that type of information, it can become a way of really feeling good about how you live in this world. So you don't need always to just passively consume, but you are paying attention and developing some skill. Yeah, I think the martial arts, meditation, any type of physical discipline is probably the first and the most accessible. I think that's why the Greeks, Plato, Aristotle, thought that education should start with control of the body, with gymnastics, with dance, with music, ways of feeling comfortable and feeling in control of your body. And I think that was a great insight, and we don't quite, we haven't applied it yet.
Well, it's interesting. On the one hand, we look at, all of the ways in which people get passionately involved in their lives, and almost everybody, I think, has had some experience of the flow state, even as you say, could be brushing your teeth. And yet, when we look at humanity on the planet, there's a sense that we are out of sync. We are destroying the environment. We face some grave crises in terms of how we relate to ourselves and to each other and to the planet as a whole. It's as if whatever we discover within ourselves in the flow state really needs to be applied to the larger problems of the world.
Yeah, that's true. I myself personally, I kind of oscillate between feeling quite optimistic and feeling somewhat pessimistic about what we are doing to ourselves and what the future is like. But I think if you put this in perspective, you realize that probably every generation has to overcome a peculiar problems of its own, and because if you look back in the past, I don't think there was ever. There may have been short periods, for instance, the late Victorian age in the 19th century, when people felt very confident and they thought they were the pinnacle of evolution and every problem has been solved. But that's very rare. Mostly people thought that the problems were getting worse. I mean, even going back again to Plato, I mean, he thought that he lived in an age of deterioration, that a golden age existed in the past, and now it got worse and worse, and he was in an iron age and so forth. And most other cultures, like the Hindu cultures, believe in this great cycles of expansion and contraction. So I think there is some truth in it. The truth is that each generation we have to consider how are we going to live our lives given the historical moment we are in. And it's never going to be perfect, and we always have to struggle. But if we don't struggle, entropy is going to overtake us. but we have, I think, the resources for making it work.
Well, this, I think, is key, the notion of struggle, that flow is not just all a dance. It's
No, that's right. That's right. It's and it's interesting that most it's almost easiest to get flow from activities that in fact mimic struggle, competition, athletic competition, boxing, wrestling, even a tennis match is a competition, a struggle. And, in this kind of artificially created struggles, it's easy to to see that this kind of great cosmic struggle in which we are involved. We have always been involved, and I think that's very attracts attention. Attracts it. I mean, the Super Bowl or whatever, basketball finals, and chess matches. I mean, it's, the Olympics. We are coming in.
the great cosmic struggle. Well, that will be the topic of our third program in this three-part series, because we're just about out of time now. But I hope that for our viewers who have been with us, that they'll check their program guides for part 3, because then we will begin to deal with the larger evolutionary issues that are related to flow and creativity. For now, Mihaly, I want to thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been really a lot of pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you for being with us.